Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the MC of GLOBSEC, Kim Dozier.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of GLOBSEC 2024 here on the Albright stage. I'm Kim Dozier, CNN Global Affairs Analyst, just walking you through what we've heard so far and the day ahead. So last night we had an award ceremony where we honored Ursula von der Leyen, Mette Frederiksen, and Martin Povéschel in memoriam. Today we continue on 3 main stages here at the Albright, downstairs at the Havel, and the Schwarzenberg stage. We have many side events also that you will have gotten invites to, and we have the GLOBSEC app, so please fire up your app. It's not only a way to answer Slido questions, but you can also put in questions as the event is going on if you're too shy to raise your hands. And today we've got prime ministers, ministers, representatives from international organizations, experts, and private sector representatives. On the Albright stage here, we're going to have panels on the future of EU defense and the EU's digital agenda, and also the reality on the ground in Ukraine. We'll be discussing that. On the Havel stage, we're going to have individual chats with the President of Finland, Slovenia, and the Prime Minister of Denmark. I'm doing my hair in honor of her. I noticed that she always puts it up, and I thought, that's a very smart woman, not wasting time. Panels on how to counter Russia's hybrid threats and flashpoints in East Asia, plus further panels dedicated to the support of Ukraine. On Schwarzenberg, we have the future of EU-China relations, priorities for the new European leadership, and looking into the EU's enlargement process. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to colleague in journalism, Sylvie Kauffmann from Le Monde. Thank you.
Yes, we follow.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining this first session on this Saturday. So it's the second day of this great conference. Yesterday was really very lively and interesting, and we'll keep going this way today. So we'll talk here this morning about EU defense strategy and how to set its priorities in light of the threats that Europe is facing. My name is Sylvie Kauffmann. I'm a foreign affairs columnist and editorial director of Le Monde. And it's my privilege to welcome our panelists this morning. So Minister Nikos Dendias. Mr. Dendias is Minister of National Defense of Greece. Welcome. We have another European Defense Minister, Guido Crosetto from Italy. Welcome. And we have a former Minister of Defense for Slovakia, Martin Sklenár. Yeah. And then we have Gundbert, yes, Scherf, who is the co-founder and CEO of Helsing, a defense deep tech company. And finally, Anna Wieslander, whom you all know here. She's the director for Northern Europe at the Atlantic Council. So please have a seat. So I guess you all listened to the President of the Commission yesterday, of the European Commission. She made quite a forceful speech in defense of European defense. She said we must build a continent-wide European defense output. So this was quite, I think, a strong statement. We'll see how we can transform this into action. Of course, this was not what the EU was created for, defense, right, originally. But new challenges and the evolving geopolitical situation. And of course, the war in Ukraine has forced the EU to shape a defense agenda. So this has, of course, a lot of implications, political, financial, and industrial and technological. So this is what we are going to explore with you. So we'll engage in a conversation between us. I will ask a few questions, and then I'll, of course, open the session to questions from you. You can do this either, as usual, by raising your hand or by giving your questions online on the Slido app, and we will get them here. So, Minister Crosetto, I will start with you, maybe. I guess you heard that speech, and Ursula von der Leyen also announced that she would appoint a defense commissioner. So what do you think? What is your reaction? Do you think this is the right way to go? And how do you see this change being implemented?
Thank you. Sorry, but I prefer speech in Italian, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Allora, if you want, then...
Posso capire.
Thank you.
Io penso che la scelta di Ursula von der Leyen sia giustissima. L'Europa non si è mai occupata di difesa. Non esiste nemmeno una commissione difesa all'Unione Europea. C'è una sottocommissione che si occupa di difesa, che non ha neanche il rango della Commissione. Non è mai esistito un commissario europeo. Non c'è mai stato un G7 sulla difesa. Ci sarà per la prima volta quest'anno in Italia, perché io ho voluto fortemente che ci fosse un G7 che si occupasse di difesa, perché trovavo assurdo che il G7 si occupasse di turismo, si occupasse di temi importanti ma marginali e non si fosse mai occupato di difesa. La scelta di Ursula von der Leyen indica una strada nuova per l'Europa che è iniziata il giorno dopo l'invasione russa in Ucraina.
When we realized that war was not something we had erased from Europe. The defense and the defense of freedom and democracy requires investments, requires sacrifice, requires hard work. We thought it was enough to be friends of the United States, and this would guarantee in the future our security, and that we could live safely, calmly, at no cost. We have found out that this is not the truth. We have found out that we have to invest in security, and that our armed forces, and this is true for all European countries, were not ready to sustain a war. Because we had built them just maybe for some international missions. We have sent thousands of soldiers in Afghanistan. Italy has 1,000 soldiers in Lebanon, in Kosovo. We have taken part in peacekeeping missions, but none of us over the last 40 years ever thought that we should build armed forces to fight to defend liberty, freedom, and democracy. We have discovered this now. We are late, and we must now run to build the European pillar of NATO, because there is no defense and deterrence policy for us, for the Western countries, outside NATO, because maybe Europe can build effective armed forces over the next 10 to 15 years. We can build an effective defense industry, because right now our industry is not able to produce what we need, but we cannot build a deterrence capability that only NATO can guarantee us. So the decision to have a new European Commissioner which will deal with building all of this is fundamental, and then it will be up to the nations to take part in all this, because the future European armed forces cannot be guaranteed by recruitment at the European level. It will mean that interoperability between our forces, the Italian forces, the Slovak forces, the German forces, will work together. Maybe Italian soldiers will go out with Greek soldiers on their ships. We must use the systems that NATO taught us to use, and these systems must speak among themselves. They must train together, and they must act by using the same modality and possibly the same equipment. And we must do all this as speedily as possible, very fast. Also going beyond the European borders. Right now we have 3 Italian ships in Japan, a carrier, 14 aircraft, Italian F-35 vertical takeoff, and other ships in support. And today I received a wonderful picture with an Italian carrier, a Japanese carrier, accompanied by a Spanish, a French, a US, a UK ship, and all together they are now training there. So that is the future of the European defense. But we must speed up the process, and all the European countries are ready to speed up this process. Also at the cost of losing some national privileges, because we have realized that we are too small to defend ourselves as single states, and for the first time over the last 50 years, we are fighting against a system that is countering us in a violent way. There is a clash between autocrats and democracies, and unfortunately, autocrats have an advantage. They are faster. They don't have an internal discussion. Yesterday, I said during the European meeting that I am disputing with Italian companies because I have to deliver to Ukraine a SAMT system, and the Italian company that must deliver it was closed for holidays. In August, they don't work on Saturdays and Sunday. They don't work at night. The Russian and Chinese companies, they work 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but this is what we have to counter. Putin decides, and an automotive company, the day after, starts producing weapons. We cannot even change by speeding up the process of producing weapons or whatever we need. So we must change. And Europe must really take note of this. The ministers have taken note of this, and I hope we can do this as fast as possible, because we really need to be fast. We don't have the time.
That was the message, I guess, from everybody. And Mr. Dendias, you also attended this meeting this week with your European counterparts. And what do you think a European Commissioner for Defense would change, or what do you want him or her to change as a priority?
First of all, I would like to say that I couldn't agree with Guido more. What he says is the absolute truth. We have lost.
About the working schedule of the European...
Not just that. I don't want to get into problems with the Greek unions upon my return, but the truth is we have to change our economies in the way that could sustain a potential defense effort in the future. We have to do that. We have to appreciate, first of all, that this is absolutely necessary. I mean, you said before that was not the purpose of the European Union. True. Defending per se was not the purpose of the European Union, but what was the purpose? The purpose of the European Union is to create a place where democracy, human rights exist, freedom of speech exists. Now, it goes without saying that for this place on earth to exist, we have to be able to defend it. Because it's not given that all countries around the world and all leaders around the world love to hear things coming out of free speech, love democracy, love human rights. So we have to be able to defend it. Now, the answer would be yes, we have NATO for this. Fine, we do have NATO, and luckily we do have NATO, but we have to do the job ourselves, and that's a job complementary to NATO's. And I totally agree with Ursula's position on trying to coordinate the defense industries and expand the defense capacities of the European Union. But if I may be allowed to say something, on that particular issue, the European Union per se is contradictory. Why am I saying that? European Union counts the defenses on the debt and the deficit. If we are saying that we have to make a huge effort and catch up, and we don't have time in front of us, that cannot be so. I mean, I'm struggling every day with the fiscal necessities of my ministry, trying to transform the Greek armed forces on what we call Agenda 2030 to a level of the 21st century. So exactly because of the challenges. Yeah. And I have the European Union on the back of me because of the deficits and the debt. And I cannot do this, I cannot do that. I have to reprogram for after 10 or 15 years.
I agree,
yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, come on, yes, we are going to have a defense commissioner, great, fine. What can the defense commissioner do if I cannot sign a check to cover
So what is the solution?
So please change the fiscal rules on defense. That would be the main thing that the European Union needs for the future.
But do you see a political will to do this, a possibility?
I see the ultimate rule, the rule of necessity to survive behind this. Now, if the fiscal rules are fine in the European Union and the European Union does not survive, that would be great. We'll have the rules there enshrined as Moses' tablets, and we will be destroyed by authoritarian powers around the world. I mean, come on. This is, it obviously goes too far. I totally understand the need for fiscal responsibilities. But this is a time that calls for extra measures.
Very good. Thank you for this very clear statement. Anna Wieslander, I will turn to you. This talk about the European pillar is not new, of course. So, you know, it's apparently getting much more urgency and we're giving it more priority, but how do you see it as realistic, or what shape, what avenues do you see to really get this European pillar? And is there such a will also on the other side of the Atlantic?
Thank you, yeah, and thanks for the invitation. Lovely to be back at GLOBSEC, but in Prague. This works well as well. It's an interesting question because this concept of European pillar has been with us since the 1960s, actually. And I've been following it for quite some time, and now it's on everybody's lips. So this is really something that I think has gotten to the minds of many. How can we really solve this? Because we have started to look at the defense of Europe in a very practical way, and then you land in a pillar of NATO. That is the preference, I think you can say safely, of almost all European states, to preserve NATO, but to strengthen the European, more Europe in NATO, so to say. So how do you do this? I think if you start from the EU side, what we have seen from the EU is starting to move to become an enabler, a facilitator for a European pillar in NATO. But you have to remember that most countries, they prefer more Europe in NATO, but they also prefer to keep quite a lot of things regarding European defense in the capitals with the member states. If it had been the opposite, we would have had grand defense funds with the Commission. We don't. So that is a reality for any defense commissioner, I think. What I would like to see is perhaps a retake on the strategic compass to kind of build in this, because the strategic compass, I think, was a good endeavor in getting a common threat perception, a feeling of joint destiny for Europe. But we did that before the full-scale invasion of Russia, before this sense of urgency that we heard the ministers now expressing. Now, we would need also to work very closely with NATO in this. So we could have, for instance, as set goals that in 2030, 50% of the capabilities provided in the defense planning process for NATO would be European. It's a high target, but it could be possible. You could pair it with a new defense pledge. We're talking about having a new, increasing the defense pledge for NATO from 2% moving up, perhaps. EU and NATO could do that similarly, having an ambition. That would also be very elegant, I think. Providing kind of a roadmap for increasing the capabilities. And with the capabilities, this is my last point, comes responsibility. So when you have the capabilities in NATO, you can talk to the US. You asked how do they perceive this across the Atlantic. Usually, the US has been a bit schizophrenic when you talk about European responsibility. Like on one hand, they want us to pay more, but they still want to lead and have everything, controlled. Now they talk about the European pillar in NATO as well. And I think they have also realized we need this balance shift. But you can not only talk about responsibility, you have to pair it with the capabilities. Show us the money, they say, across the Atlantic. And I think that's also a little bit, we need to do both.
Mm-hmm. It's the money and it's the industry also, but we'll talk about this in a minute. But I would like to go to you, Mr. Sklenár, now. This European pillar, of course, we'll have to assemble various sensitivities within Europe. And we have seen with the war in Ukraine that there were indeed different sensitivities. This part of Europe now is reckoned with a lot of kind of also gratitude we're being grateful now. We're thanking Central Europe for its lucidity and its clear-sighted view of what was going on in Russia and what was the aims of Russia. Do you see these differences of sensitivities in Europe and of priorities also? The frontline states, also Northern Europe is having different priorities now or different sense of urgency. Do you see it as a problem or do you see it as a strength?
In the discussion in the EU.
Yes, and in the effort to build to strengthen the European pillar.
Thank you. And I strongly believe the discussion is what needs to be had. I mean, I was very encouraged by the strong words of President von der Leyen yesterday, and the clear commitment, to have the defense commissioner. But there needs to be a discussion. What is it actually that the EU wants to do between the CSDP as it is set up right now and the collective defense that we hear that this is not the ambition for the EU. Let's take it realistically. As the threat perception goes, for deterrence and defense in Europe, you need the United States. The combined power of the European forces is simply not enough to provide the level of deterrence without the US, without the UK, right? And very strong nuclear power armed countries. You need the power of those to be able to protect Europe, and it needs to be done through NATO. This is what we have been building for 75 years, and this is what works. Deterrence in NATO works. So what can the EU do? The ministers actually should be, from my point of view, in the lead. And I'm glad they had a meeting yesterday, and I hope they will have many more, where they will actually dive deep into what it means to building the European Defence Union. What is it? How do we use it as a framework to complement what we do in NATO, to increase the strength? How do we build more deterrence using European capabilities, the resolve, the ambition, the interest of Europeans to do more? And when we speak about the EU-NATO relationship, which will be crucial to define in this next phase, we usually speak about there shouldn't be any unnecessary duplications between EU and NATO, which has been working well for a long time. Now I believe it is time to define the necessary duplications, right? So let's not define this negatively as what is unnecessary, we don't need to build it, but what is necessary that the Europeans do, and how can they do it best using the EU framework to support NATO's deterrence and defense, increase European capabilities, and yes, arrive to levels which are more balanced, also in the whole NATO balance sheet of power, if I may say it, if I may call it so. And how do we best use what is already available, right? The Europeans, they have the resolve, they have the money, I would say. The Europeans have increased money significantly. I agree with the ministers. I mean, defense spending outside that limitations would actually probably motivate countries to spend even more than the 2%, which might work best for everybody. So the money is there, the resolve is there. The capability need to come. There needs to be a vision, a plan how to do this, and not to do this in the EU separately and then come to NATO as a pillar. I'm sorry, I still are working on the pillar thing a little bit, which for me it's not something that should be very separate in NATO. It should stay as it is. NATO as a club of countries talking to each other individually and collectively. But what is it that we can do, and let's find ways to bring into the European effort as a whole into also the NATO structure through the NATO defense planning process. Voluntary national targets. You can imagine many vehicles how to do this. But it's going to be the ministers, the defense commissioner, the HRVP, and obviously the president of the commission to make sure that we have a clear vision how to do this in the next 5 years, because it's going to be let's call it midterm, but probably a long-term endeavor to move from what Minister Crosetto is saying. We don't have the bureaucratic, the administrative structures for defense. I mean, we have some military committees, we have a political military group, we have the PSC in the EU, but we need to put them on steroids a little bit and make them more military, make them think militarily, think deterrence and think defense, not just crisis management.
Do you have very good? Do you have a suggestion for who could be this EU Commissioner for Defense? No? Okay.
Not my word.
Nice try.
It depends what the commissioner actually will supposed to be doing. What will be the portfolio, right? I mean, if we...
The nation.
Well, the nation, but also the work. Because if you take the commissioner who would be who would take the work that the Commission currently does, it would be basically a defense industry commissioner, right? So it would be somebody basically wing-tailing it with Thierry Breton. So
this is supposed to be different. It's not only industry this time. Yeah. So it will be very political also.
Breton.
He's definitely a candidate, but okay. So there is a very important industrial component to this strategy, of course, and I will turn to you, Gundbert, Scherf. What is the biggest challenge you see? Of course, you're involved in deep technology, in AI. Is Europe up to the task, you think, or is it on the right path to meet this challenge?
Yeah, I think those are, I would separate actually the question that you just phrased. I think we're up to the task. I don't think we're yet on the right path, but I think we can certainly do it. I mean, the panel is entitled Tomorrow's Threats, Today's Priorities. I would say the answer cannot be yesterday's technology only. And so first of all, I'm very encouraged as well by the sense of urgency that the two ministers express and that I think echo President von der Leyen's statement. I and we certainly share that sense of urgency. We've built, a company, a pan-European company in 3.5 years, hundreds of technologists from all over Europe coming together to organize defense. And I can assure the minister they were not on holiday in August and also working this weekend. I hope I don't get into trouble with labor law now, but that's because we iterate technologies in Ukraine, with Ukraine, but also for Europe at a much higher pace than I think we have been used to. And I think my first point would be, you can't meet the challenge of collective deterrence only by arming for a war of sort of attrition. I think you need to actually have an asymmetric technology advantage. I think that is the lesson from Ukraine. And that, I think, to me means we need to think a lot harder and a lot more about how can we first observe and learn from that and bring that much more quickly back to Europe. I'll just give you a few examples from Ukraine, and I think anybody who had a chance to listen to Minister Fedorov here will have heard this quite impressive story. But what Ukraine has done is, yes, they've used, of course, Western technologies, also legacy systems, but they paired it with modern technology, right? And sort of we've been humbly supporting that. You see, all of a sudden you realize, there's artillery, yes, but it works with drones and software. We've actually been able to make previously non-interoperable artillery systems from Europe that never could work together in Ukraine and have a smart targeting system. We've seen a country that has no sovereign satellites have full real-time situational awareness using software AI. We've seen, when artillery ran short, that strike drones became a scaled, equivalent. When the president announced 1 million drones, people thought it was impossible, and it actually is possible. And I think we've also seen, vice versa, that platforms that we send that are not protected against drones are essentially very vulnerable. And so there's all of those lessons. And every time we talk about Ukraine, I think most people agree that this is happening by now. When we go back to Europe, I don't see that discussion. I actually see us prolonging the procurement of platforms from the past too much. And I fully understand we need both. We need mass, we need platforms, but we also need smart mass. And so my second point would be that I think one role Europe could play, and actually the pandemic was a great example. In the pandemic, Europe didn't actually end up buying masks or ventilators. It actually played the key role in ending the pandemic through the vaccine. And I would say the vaccine for this is first Ukraine winning, but also Europe being incredibly deterring. And that, I think, has a lot to do with focusing on technologies and modernizing armies. And I think a lot of the challenges we have with legacy, sort of incumbency, strong national interest are not so strong when you go to modern technologies, because it just doesn't exist. So I think the Commission could play a huge role in learning the lessons. And just to make it very concrete, my third point would be, I think we should have a program that does essentially builds a new resiliency production system. We have a sort of reasonably strong industrial base that has now also been strengthened through a lot of contracts, but it's essentially at capacity and everything takes longer. The minister sort of pointed that out. I think we need to see what Ukraine has been able to do, what also Western companies supporting Ukraine have been able to do, is to build production systems that are much faster, highly scaled, use modern technologies, and are much more affordable. The systems, you use a strike drone, if you look at the impact that it has with smart, intelligent, software, it beats any missile system just by cost and scalability. It also doesn't take years, but it takes months to produce. And I think, and also you can build it in a distributed way. You can build it across Europe in multiple ways, because you don't need billion-euro investments to build that. So I think we need, next to the sort of legacy production system, which we do need, I'm not saying we don't, we need a new system. And I think that could be a job of a commission to spur that and essentially move us forward. So I think the path is quite clear. I think we just need to be...
So this war has changed the way we look at technology.
In a big way, not in a small way. It's not just, we use a few drones, but otherwise it's the same. If you go to the front line, because of the availability of drones on both sides, right? Russia is also using them. Satellites, the battlefield is fully transparent. Anything that moves in the front line in 20 kilometers is spotted and quickly taken out. So that's why we are seeing, long-range precision being important. But then there's electronic warfare. So with electronic warfare, nothing that is remote controlled works very long. So we need a lot more intelligence, connectivity, software. And I think that debate, needs to be much more prominent. And that could be a very good impulse for the commissioner, depending, of course, on the exact profile, to give that impulse and create new programs. The artillery procurement program was, I think, a good thing. we now need to do something similar in modern.
Yeah, and there's another dimension of this war, I mean, not only this war, but of the current challenges, for security challenges, which is being pointed out in one of the questions on Slido, is the hybrid warfare. So how has Russia's hybrid warfare in Europe changed with the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine? That's a question from Martin Fortnusek. Does any of you would any of you like to address this issue of the challenge of the hybrid warfare?
La sfida, se posso, vi lascio il tempo per la cuffia.
Just take the time to take off my headset. Hybrid war, Russia's hybrid war, is not only fought by Russia. There is China with Russia, there is Iran with Russia, there is Korea with Russia. Let's stop talking only about Russia, because if Russia had been alone, it would not have been capable to really cope with the challenge in Ukraine. Russia is able to challenge Ukraine, not only because they have a very good production capability, but because Iran, China, and Korea are providing weapons. So the hybrid challenge that I'm most concerned about is that we're not fighting in the way we should as regards the Russian and Chinese capability to influence public opinion, to try to poison democracies, because it is impossible to poison the autarchies, countries that are not democratic, but it is very easy to poison democracies. And this is what they are doing now, for example, in Africa, both China and Russia. They are building an anti-Western environment. It's what the BRICS, that they are doing with the BRICS by countering NATO and the BRICS. And there is one thing which is at the basis of industry: raw materials. There is an everyday war on raw materials. 99% of rare earths, of critical minerals come from China. 88% of rare earth come from China. 70% of lithium that Europe is using comes from China. Reserves of this material are Chinese reserves. So why are they so interested in China and Russia, are so interested in Africa? Because they want to give wealth to the African people? No, because they are the source of this precious, valuable material. And the same can be said about the seabed, because there is a war beyond the one that we are testifying, that is being fought for a long time. And we, as NATO and the EU, we must fight this war, because even if it seems very far from us, it is part of the war, because it reflects upon supply chains, upon industrial production. If you don't have superconductors, you don't have the future. So the hybrid war that they are fighting is also on this plan. There is war in the field, violence in Ukraine, and their attempt in Israel, for example, to create havoc. But there is a war in the medium to long term on raw materials, natural resources, on water, on earth, on information, on the capability to penetrate, and on disinformation, on cyber. We have so many scenarios before us. And I'm saying this to Europe, not to the United States. There is no single European nation, and I'm including also the UK. None of us can fight this fight alone, by itself. We can fight with Europe joined in this fight, and Europe should join NATO, and we are still very small, even in this way, if we compare ourselves to China and India. And the thing I was more concerned about last week was the dialogue between Modi and Xi, because if we have 3 billion people against us, we must be concerned. There is a hybrid war that is being fought also in the interaction between nations and with nations, and going beyond weapons and war. We must have a future strategy.
Add to what the minister said, I think the I think the hybrid warfare is a nice way of saying, you know, Russia's trying to get us used to transgressions, right? And so that I think includes, you know, and it exploits simply that we have a very large eastern flank. So if we take with the accession, you know, of new countries to NATO, you know, the eastern flank is twice what it was in the Cold War. And it's not a Cold War, it's a hot war. And we have a third of the assets that we used to have. And I think if this comes back to my point on like how do we respond to this with technology, if we now try to equip this with human people and helicopters, we will take 10, 15, 20 years and we will not have enough. If we, however, think about this as a problem of, you know, using drones, monitoring the Baltic Sea, you know, one of the sort of vast oceans to monitor our critical infrastructure underwater, et cetera, we can find quicker responses. So I think I think it's quite clear what Russia's doing. I think I'm more interested in how can we more quickly, the sense of urgency that was expressed, fix that within, you know, 2 years, not 10.
Thank you. Anna, and then I will open the floor if, okay, we'll have one question here. Just quickly, Anna, this issue has been addressed in other panels yesterday, the US election. This dynamic that the panelists are describing and which is very visible today in Europe, can it be completely changed or overturned by the result of the election in November, or do you think it has its own strength and it has to materialize somehow?
Yeah, I think on the whole, the direction for Europe will be the same. So we will have to take more responsibility for our security. We will have to build the resources. We have to speed up. We have to take this seriously and not stand on the balcony and watch Europe as a battlefield evolving. And hybrid is a very important part of this. I just want to underline that it did not start in 2022. Russia's systematic hybrid warfare against Europe has been continuing for at least a decade. And if we doubt their military capability sometimes in Ukraine, they are very efficient on the hybrid. We are not deterring Russia in the hybrid sphere yet. We need to be much better. But on the US, I think the direction of more Europe in NATO is still there. Although, will we have a new Trump presidency? I have not met anyone that can completely disclose the fact that there might happen something with NATO and the US during this factor. Probably not, but there might be a risk. And if it does, this will be a whole new ballgame for us. I mean, that's so profound, I think, that we will have to start anew. It's like a war coming over us. So something very transformative for us in that case. But as for now, I say that this direction of more Europe in NATO is a pretty safe road ahead, I would say.
Thank you very much. So we have a question here. Is there any other? Okay, we'll take these two. This gentleman here and Eleonor Kauer, the lady here. And okay.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here today. The announcement of the President of the European Commission for a new Defence Commissioner was lauded across Europe, but is it mostly a symbolic move? My point is this going to be a fancy procurement manager with a really interesting title? Because from a financial perspective, the EU Defence Fund allocates 8 billion, I think, between 2021 and 2027, and all of you know this is a funny number when it comes to comparison with the US budget for 2024, which is 840 billion. And at the same time, a lot of the responsibilities that the new EU Defence Commissioner might have overlap with the Internal Market Commissioner, with the High Representative for Foreign Policy. So the question is, are we creating a portfolio with no financial backing on the one hand and no actual responsibilities, or is there going to be an intra-commission restructuring when it comes to responsibilities? And at the same time, the EU Commissioner on Defence might have to take certain decisions that edge on the national sovereignty and kind of expand the constitutional limits when it comes to the European Union. So are we willing to have that discussion so early on? Thank you.
Is your question directed to any of the panelists in particular?
I mean, the Atlantic Council came out with that very interesting article a couple of days ago when it comes to the fancy title of the procurement manager, but I'd love to hear the opinions of the ministers as well on that.
Okay, so why don't you go if you want? Yeah. And
thank you. Well, yes, it looks like, and I mentioned it might be a defense industry commissioner in charge of a small pot of money. But I mean, from my point of view, this is certainly not the case. The important thing is not even that the commissioner will be appointed, but that Ursula von der Leyen feels so strongly about him, because this gives you the sense of urgency that there will be in the Commission, and by extension also in the Council and the European Council, which you need also to define the ambition and to move actually and to reallocate the money that was there at one point during the last fiscal period, but then it got killed because of various other priorities, especially on mobility and others. And now we are scraping it back to the EDF and ASAP and other funds to bring it together. But the Commission has so much more to offer in defense. First of all, if defense is one of the main topics, then the Commission can do a lot of stuff actually in terms of legislative initiative. If they come up with initiatives to overcome the bottlenecks and the legislative hurdles that we have in military mobility, or they can propose ambitious projects like introducing a single market for defense goods. I think the industry would really love to have a situation where once you import into the European Union, you can then move freely the defense goods, which is not the case, and doesn't really help you with spare parts, even after procurement of the technology and equipment that you have done for your armies, or by then importing equipment from Ukraine for maintenance. Incredibly difficult bureaucratic process right now because of the limitations. I mean, we have experience with it with our maintenance hub in Slovakia, but also work on the willingness of financial institutions to provide money for the industry, which is still a problem given the ethical rules and the taxonomy that is there for defense companies to get their hands on money. So the Commission has a broad portfolio, and it only depends on how big they want to play this. And with Ursula von der Leyen, I think it's going to go big.
Mm-hmm. And there's a complementary question here from Giuseppe Spatafora, maybe for you. What impact would this portfolio have on the HRVP's portfolio?
Sorry, on the
High Representative for Foreign Policy?
Well, it is clear that these two persons have to work very closely together. It cannot be a separate job. And of course, as everything new, this new Defense Commissioner will have problems in establishing the role, in creating an understanding of the role first of all, within the European Union, but also in the member states, in the capitals. Because up to now, it was totally a national prerogative that we know. But I would prefer to take the optimistic side. It's a step. It's a very important step. And as always, big things start with small steps. So let's encourage this effort and see where we go from there.
Very good. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, and we have a question here in the front. Please, can we have a mic? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we'll take the two. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Cecilia Bonefeld from Editorial Europe, Director General, and also heavily involved in both Ukraine and in NATO tech strategy. So I think if we look at Ukraine, 3 major learnings. Interaction between private sector and the ministry and the public sector, absolutely key to have the skills, to have the techies inside of the government, and to have a close relation to private sector. Second, drone beats hardware, AI beats hardware. I mean, when you have intelligent systems, you can destroy for billions of advanced gear in seconds. Third, platforms of actually having transparency even as a warning systems and being able to handle data beats, again, any kind of hardware that you can actually invest in that will be finished in 20 years. So my question is, the biggest problems for companies and tech companies in Europe is that we're not scalable. Everything is anchored on national level. And what tech companies need is to scale fast across country. So we need the ministry to work really as a team to address these challenges, because tech will solve some of the problems that we will only solve in 20 years, if not that. So my question is, how do we break down those barriers? How can we get the defense minister to discuss investment in advanced technologies? And should we actually invest maybe 25% of the future defense spending in the EU on advanced technologies?
Thank you. Okay, so we'll take... It's coming. No, it's coming. Don't worry. Thank you. The last question, and please, quick answers.
Sure, I'll be really fast. Thank you very much for your very clear presentations this morning. I heard you, especially the ministers, mentioning how important it is to keep the NATO framework and how we are in need of that framework as Europeans. But we saw this year at some point that we were almost left alone with the US struggle in terms of military aid to Ukraine, and that could happen again, of course, with the elections. And you mentioned it, what would happen in a new Trump scenario. So I don't want to reopen the Pandora box or the perhaps differences in view that we had in March. We ultimately agreed to give the additional facility to Ukraine, and we managed to get there. But what do you think we need to do to harmonize our strategies? And perhaps that goes back to also public investment. What would be the priorities to ensure our autonomy? And is that autonomy even possible and something that you see as coming in the near future? Thank you.
Okay, so I think the two ministers will have the last word on this, and in 1 minute each.
Allora, io nella vita mi sono occupato.
In my life, I have been dealing with defense, but for 10 years I've been the chairman of the Association of the Italian Defense Industry, so I think it would be easier for the new commissioner to build future European armed forces, talking about interoperability, build the rules for the single market. It would be much easier to do this than to have all the European industry join up. I don't think it is the time for a European procurement, because I don't think that nations will give up their national industries. Why? Because industries mean job, and I'm looking at our moderator, and can you imagine Thales, Dassault, Airbus renouncing their sovereignty? Can I renounce on behalf of Leonardo Fincantieri to our sovereignty? This is the biggest problem at the industrial level, also because we are talking about private companies, Rheinmetall and so on. The public industries are maybe in Italy and France. The others are private companies. You cannot order them to join up. This is a very difficult problem.
Bisogna ragionare probabilmente sulle tecnologie.
We have to reason about technologies, the speed of technologies, how to open up to technology, how to just break down all the bureaucratic obstacles. It is so difficult. We need 20 days for MBDA to intervene on the SAMP-T. We need 15 days to take the SAMP-T battery to Ukraine for the bureaucracy. And this is a system that will be used to defend Ukrainian children, but we have to pass through other European countries, and it needs such a long time. Is it tolerable? I don't think so. We have so many aspects we have to deal with. For me, the most difficult one is to create a single European market. We can find a way to have them operate together, and the only thing that can push the merger of these industries is incentives, is fiscal advantages. This, if you're talking about a European level, otherwise everything will remain the same, unfortunately.
To say a word to...
First of all, I finding myself totally agreeing with Guido here today. It is clear that incentives have to be produced by the new European Commission in order to help create a common market, the common space of the European defense industries. And that is needed. And that is not needed just as an antagonism towards the United States. But let us be honest and clear between us, and there was a question posed before on this. I'm not predicting the next US elections, and I'm not entitled to do that. Who am I to speak about the choice of the American people? But there's one element we Europeans have to appreciate. There is a growing isolationist element in the United States. A part of the United States society, for their own reasons, see that the United States can live safely between the two oceans and does not necessarily have to involve itself in Europe or anywhere else. And even the not isolationist part of the United States looks more towards China and less towards Europe. It was the invasion in Ukraine that changed that, but changed it up to a point. So Europe has to be able to sustain itself. And to be able to sustain itself, it has to have a defense industry of itself, not as an antagonist, but as something that can help us defend ourselves, and in the end of the day, we realize the main purpose of the Union, which is this unique space of human rights, of democracy, of free speech.
So the message is clear. Thank you very much. We have exceeded our time. Thank you, and join me in the prayer. Thank you.